Hello everybody and welcome back to your RPG Radio, your only source for smooth tones, snarky comments, and swift justice. I am your host Winback, and today we will be pressing on with another installment of the Grim Dawn Ultimate Lore Through. Last week we took out the sadistic madman Warden Krieg and the ethereal taking up residence in his horrifying brain hole, and since we have all but scoured the first act of the game, we just have to finish up some side questing on a little island just outside of Lower Crossing. Once that's done, we will eventually come back to this part of the game to unearth some more secrets, but that will be it for a while. Everyone has been very grateful, and the stronghold of Devil's Crossing is looking slightly less like it could burst into flames at any moment. But the last thing on our checklist is going to take us deep down into the lore mines and sprinkle some of that story seasoning onto our main course. So if you weren't aware, once you exit Devil's Crossing on the left side of the very early parts of Lower Crossing, you'll find a little rowboat which will take you over to Hargate's Isle. This is where you will begin the side quest, assuming that you have already gotten the task to do so from Kasparov, and that little lectern is where you will find page 1 of Hargate's journal.
First day at my new lab, I must say I am thrilled to get started. The days of having my nose stuck in the books are over. There comes a time when studying old tomes reaches its limits. Eventually one must set out on their own to pursue new adventures and ideas not yet considered. It is our sacred duty as scholars to leave a mark upon this world. My wife Helen and my dearest daughter Eleanor will be joining me soon in our new home. Helen has expressed concern about our little girl growing up in a laboratory so far away from other children, but I've calmed her down. Eleanor will have everything she requires provided for, and Burwich is just a short boat ride away should she ask for a playmate. Together, Helen and I are going to do something great, something no arcanist has dared ever consider, the creation of new life. The ether is a wondrous source of energy, and yet nobody stopped to ponder its effects upon organic material. Helen's expertise in biological arts should prove most valuable in this endeavor.
We see everything begin as it always does with these bright, young, scientific minds, or maybe young, I don't actually know. But the hunger for research and renown starts us down a dark path.
At Helen's recommendation, I have chosen the lonely green swamp adder as the basis of my experiment. Its short lifespan and rapidly shedding skin make for a malleable test subject. The initial results seemed promising at first. Using high concentrations of aether energy, we were able to instill various mutations within the specimens, creating new limbs or inducing gigantism. Unfortunately, none of the samples survived beyond a couple of weeks, their higher brain functions being seemingly incapable of handling the introduction of additional bodily elements. For our second batch of experiments, we molded the adders with a few grovels captured by local trappers. The results were curious, to say the least. While this was not the breakthrough I was looking for, we seemed to be heading in the right direction. The dull mind of a grovel was capable of adapting to its new body, but its primitive and disgustingly malformed physique would see me become the laughingstock of my colleagues. No, I must see this through to its logical conclusion. Helen may frown upon it, but the next step seems clear as day to me.
Obviously, the next step is animal experimentation and experimentation with lower life forms, quote-unquote, in the Grim Dawn universe, so yeah, crazy arcanists abound.
I have sent Helen and Eleanor away for the summer to visit family in the capital while I continue my work alone. I tasked a few unsavory individuals to gather volunteers for the next stage of my research. Mere vagrants and rovers, people nobody would miss. The fees they charged were considerable, but I would pay any price when I came so close to my breakthrough. The samples arrived in the middle of the night, delivered to their cells as promised. My collaborators took their pay and left promptly without asking any questions. Frankly, they looked a bit disturbed, but I was unfazed. They are simpletons, unable to fathom the importance of my work. The specimens began stirring by morning, their frightened cries echoing through the lab. I explained to them that they were selected for an important duty, that their lives would finally have meaning and purpose. The scum should have been thanking me, but instead they cursed me as a madman and a criminal. I dismissed their accusations and got to work. There was much to be done.
It only took 3 journal entries to go from willing scientist to crazy asshole. New record for sure.
Helen and Eleanor returned early from their trip. While Eleanor was otherwise occupied with her toys in the living quarters, Helen came down into the lab to find me in the midst of my latest study. The horrified look on her face is something I shall never forget. I tried to be reasonable. I explained that what she witnessed was merely a stepping stone, that those men and women died so that our work would not be squandered on snakes and grubbles, but she would not budge. My wife, my partner, had betrayed me at this most critical junction. My work is too important to let emotional attachments get in the way. I did the only sensible thing. Let history judge my actions. With the unfortunate distraction dealt with, I returned to my results. The human-snake hybrids had proven unstable and violent. I was assaulted on several occasions while attempting to study their physical functions, but those attacks proved to be little more than outbursts on the verge of death. All of the specimens died shortly after the procedure. Dissection revealed an incomplete hybridization of internal organs. With a dysfunctional digestive system, death was inevitable. But I wonder if perhaps the subjects were too old for the procedure to succeed. If I started over with a younger candidate, then perhaps I would finally have the results that I seek.
If you couldn't tell during the fight, the boss of this location is named Elena the First Slith. Between that and the lore notes, I'm sure you can figure out the title of this episode. If the apocalypse wasn't alarming enough, there was even more terrifying stuff happening long before the ethereals made their way onto the scene. The world of Cairn is still rampant with toxic ambition, blatant disregard for human life, and callousness that really has you stopping to think, maybe they really did need a big reset button. Now, there are a couple more lore notes about the Slith peppered throughout the world, but these are random lore notes, and unfortunately, I've only managed to collect 2 and 3, I believe. So I'll give you the lowdown on all 3 of them here in just a second, but remember, if you're looking to pick all this stuff up on your own, there's a good chunk of lore notes that only drop randomly, and you do have to kind of get them in whatever order that they drop. Without further ado, these are page 1, 2, and 3 of the Origins of the Slith.
In all the history of our great nation, there has been no greater atrocity committed than the creation of the vile vermin we call Slith. Part man, part serpent, the Slith are a testament to the dangers of the arcane and served as the driving force behind the formation of the Guildum Arcanum and its tighter sanctions on arcane practices. The Slith owe their existence to the actions of a single individual, Oswald Hargate. Backed by family wealth and a passion for research, Oswald aspired to leave his mark upon the study of the arcane. Little did he know that his legacy would leave a permanent stain upon all arcanists and their field.
Origins of the Slith, page 2.
Oswald Hargate firmly believed that the Aether could be used to create new life. Convinced that he could supersede the gods, Oswald set out to perform his heinous research in a, to this day, unknown location. Though not much is known about the exact details of his research, the results were quite clear. Calling his creation a Slith for its slithering movement and snake-like lower body, Oswald triumphantly announced his findings to the Arcanum Society. The abomination bore the torso of a man and the tail of a snake, though its reptilian snout was unlike either species. Its eyes stared back at you with a hint of human sorrow. Though it was clearly a dulled mind with no indication of human conscience trapped within the Slith body. Those attending were shocked by the blatant disregard for the gods in their domain. Following a brief trial, Oswald was charged with the endangering society and was imprisoned for the remainder of his life. The specimen was destroyed and its ashes scattered to the winds, with Oswald behind bars and the Slith dead. All believed that the nightmare was over, but they were wrong. When the Slith first began to appear in the area known as Whitemire, it became clear that Oswald did not create just one Slith. As his laboratory was never uncovered, officials could only guess as to the origin of the new species. The Slith were incredibly invasive, easily dominating the local food chain and reproducing at an alarming rate. As their numbers multiplied, the Slith adapted a primitive tribal hierarchy, with certain members of their packs exhibiting clear authority over the rest. Perhaps most alarmingly of all, shamanistic behavior was reported among the Slith population, indicating a strong connection to the Aether and perhaps their unnatural origins. All efforts to exterminate the Slith proved fruitless, with the species simply returning at a new location from hidden nests and caverns. It is without a doubt that the actions of one arrogant individual will continue to reverberate across countless generations to come.
So with just a couple notes and some context from Kasparov, we get an interesting peek at some societal stuff going on pre-Grim Dawn. Turns out the Slith were what drove mankind to create the Gildum Arcanum, which actually gets mentioned a lot in other lore notes. But that was created to control the use of Aether and arcane magics in the world. According to the notes in Kasparov's request, we find out that this was almost a century ago. So snake people have been around in this world for even longer than most characters in the game. The revelation gets even more shocking as we actually explore the island for this quest and find out just how long the first Slith has been alive. All that being said, though, the story of the Slith is rather tragic in retrospect, and that is another theme for the game, kind of corrupt ambition leading to a very tragic downfall and a complete disregard for everything that is just basic human decency. So really the game kind of drives home the point that while the apocalypse is terrible, the humans that came before may not have been the most deserving of the power that they had, and the power of the Aether can corrupt very, very easily. Now, after our Slith questing, we get tasked to head out to the west. Over the broken bridge from Devil's Crossing, we need to start hunting down bandits who are amassing for an inevitable attack on the sanctuary. Things have been rocky, but the lack of access from one side of the river to the other means that the bandits can't easily get to our place. At some point, though, it sounds like they managed to wrangle enough numbers and power that they're going to chance it anyway very soon. Act 2 is actually one of my favorite in the game, because there is a huge repository of lore going on underneath everything that's happening, and you really start to feel just how big and old a world Cairn really is. So after a brief conversation with Mr. Stephen Skinner and his family, who is trapped inside his home, you have one of two choices. You can either invite him back to the prison and give him a place to find some hope, or you can try to talk in circles and watch him burn his family alive. So that is obviously a very difficult choice for some people, but after that, we're going to pick up another lore note and really dive into some more religious fanaticism in the era of the Grim Dawn.
They mocked us and drove us out. They called us heretics and madmen. They thought our great prophecy and purpose was fanciful and ridiculous. Woe unto them! Behold the divine wrath that has been delivered unto the unbelievers in the remaking of the world. Our prophecy has come to pass, and I hear not laughter any more. I hear only deathly silence. Doom has befallen the wicked, the ignorant, and the indolent. Only we chosen few who have trained and prepared our bodies and our souls to weather the cleansing of the world will survive and thrive amongst this death and decay. Look to your right and to your left, in front and behind you. You see the faces of your hallowed brothers and sisters, bonded together in this holy quest. We have been tasked with the sacred duty to extinguish the last remnants of corruption and reseed the purified land with our progeny, so that the new dawn can arise. Take strength in each other and in the knowledge that we are destined to fulfill this divine purpose. Long have we prepared for this moment, and our time of concealment is ending. We will strike forth boldly, northward, and to our destiny. Let not the faithless, the corrupted, or the demonic stand in our path. lest our divine wrath be visited upon them. Now muster, my children, gather only those belongings that can profit us in our holy war, and let us march forth from this humble refuge unto our destiny.
This note is actually introducing a character that will play a much bigger part in Act 7 of the game. And not only that, but this also serves as a connection between the lore of Act 2 and the lore of Act 7. So that might not make much sense now, but I promise when it comes together it will be very cool. For now, just remember that the author of this note, Father Kaiman, is a very influential figure and shares a lot of similarities to our favorite reoccurring supporting character, Inquisitor Creed. Apart from that, though, you may have noticed some very similar themes to the Chthonian cult notes. Something that the lore in this game does very well is drawing parallels between many of the factions at war within the world. The perspective of the main character is really one of objective clarity and purpose, looking in on some infighting and strife. As the player, you may end up asking yourself more than once, what's the difference between the bad guy cult and this other cult? And the answer often boils down to a single motivation, which can be traced back to whichever deity or figure that they worship. There is one last lore note in this episode to talk about, and we are going to find that here at the Crumbling Watch. You might pass this note by once or twice because of the location, but it is actually very, very good.
If these crumbling stones could speak, what tales would they tell? 1,000 years of history lost to the ravages of time. What wonders and horrors have these stones seen? The splendor of a shining kingdom and the corruption that brought it all crashing down, all told within a few bits of rock. All of it's lost now. Only fragments remain in the old tombs and the forgotten places. I wonder if King Rowan was deceived, that by abdicating his throne, he brought about the very thing he wished to flee. I also wonder how many of those last lords of Arcovia fled to this once great fortress to escape the collapse of their empire. The great Arcovian Watch guarding the southern borders. Did they hide in futile hope of being overlooked by rampaging peasants who sought them out for their greed and their arrogance? Or did they fight to the last? Were they captured and hung from the walls of their own strongholds? Or did they flee into the catacombs, only to perish among the relics of the past? I sit here now and wonder what my fate will be among the ashes of the past. Will I join them equally forgotten? Or will the bandits and horrors now stalking the world find me in this hiding place and tear me apart? Not sure it matters anymore. All the knowledge that I've gathered, all of the scrolls and tomes and memoirs that I've written, none of them matter. The world is gone, lost to time as the great Arcovian Empire. We have been reduced to savages, fighting for scraps of food and blankets like packs of wild dogs. We murder one another for a place to sleep and sacrifice our friends and family to blood cults and vain promises of safety. I always questioned whether the history of Erelon would stand the test of time as Arcovia had before us. Now I'd rather we were not remembered at all. Scribe Fagin of Berwich.
Leave it to a writer to be the most nihilistic, pessimistic person you find at the end of the world. Jokes aside though, this note is a little tease of what I feel like is the real story behind Act 2. The scribe talks about the walls of the fortress that we're currently killing skeletons in as being a thing of power in history long past. He mentions that Arcovia, an ancient city very similar to Rome, and the turmoil it met with during its collapse. As we know from earlier notes, King Rowan, the ruler of Arcovia, abdicated his throne and took the most loyal of his followers with him on an endless journey across Cairn. They became known as the Rowari, or the Rovers, that we meet all over the place. Coincidentally, the Rovers are one of the few people still left in the world that aren't out to destroy it or rob their way back to comfort. Rovers are constantly taken advantage of because they are one of the only remaining groups of people who value peace and material detachment. This is also interesting when compared to the Northern March of Kaiman's Chosen, but more on that in another episode. The scribe mentions that remaining rulers of Arcovia met with a violent uprising. He ponders whether they fled to this hold to fight for their lives or maybe ventured into the catacombs of their people to hide. We know from our meeting with Roldarathis in the flooded passage that many of the leaders of the ancient city did just that. But like I said, this note is a bit of a tease, so take that with a grain of salt because there will be more to come on this whole story as we get further into Act 2. Now, along the way, we did meet Isaiah Redden and his partner? I think that's how they described each other, but that was yet another side quest happening out in the world that was, pretty easy decision to make when your business guy tries to do pretty unspeakable things to your daughter. I feel like it's a good plan to give him the old stab and dab, Get out of there while you can. But apart from Stephen Skinner and Isaiah Redden, I don't believe there was anybody else out in the world for us to take care of other than the group of rovers hiding in the old foothills and then the group of rovers just above in Old Arcovia. The rovers lost their elder in a bandit raid, and he took off with a relic that was very important to their people. So we've got to go find his body right here, take the relic back to the rovers, and help them out the best we can. Because, like I said, the rovers are probably the best natured people still in the world at the moment, and taking advantage of them feels really bad. I was thinking about keeping the relic for myself for this playthrough, but my god, is it just having a conscience is a difficult thing when you're playing video games and you have to be a bad guy. But all that aside, that will do it for this episode of the Ultimate Lore Through. On the next episode, we will be back going into the mine fortress of Darius Cronley to fight the big bad of the bandits, quote unquote, figure out what's going on in there, and further diving down into the deep, dark doom and gloom that is Act 2. It gets so much better, I promise, and this is really where the game starts to grab, specifically me, in its lore, but I think it really, really does take off from here. So, until next time, I hope you enjoyed yourself, learned a thing or two. Let me know in the comments or in any of the other videos if you found something interesting, just like these little nooks and crannies off the side of the map that you're seeing on the screen right now. And I will see you next time.